Hey everyone, and welcome to your Deep Dive. This one's all about Alexander the Great.
Oh, yeah.
You've given us some really cool sources for this one. Encyclopedia entries,
Yeah.
historical analyses,
Hmm.
even a piece that looks at Alexander from a Persian perspective.
Oh, wow.
It seems like you want to go way beyond that simple great conqueror image.
Right.
And really understand the real complexities of this guy. I mean, was he a military genius?
Right.
A brutal tyrant? Did he bring cultures together or destroy them? Was he actually a god king or just deeply flawed?
Well, it's incredible how much debate there still is about Alexander.
Yeah.
Even thousands of years later.
Yeah.
He really does embody a lot of contradictions.
You can't deny his military accomplishment. Like, creating an empire that big by the time he was 30 is just mind-blowing.
It is. And the sources you gave us actually get deep into his strategic thinking.
Yeah.
Especially at the Battle of Gaugamela.
Okay.
He was facing the whole Persian army,
Whoa.
led by King Darius III, but he just completely outmaneuvered them.
Yeah. It wasn't just about brute force.
No.
He used these really smart tactics, like the sources mentioned, feigned retreats and flanking maneuvers.
Yeah.
It sounds like a chess game, almost.
Yeah, and it's actually a battle that military experts still study today.
Wow.
One key thing was his use of the companion cavalry.
Oh, okay.
They were like this elite force,
Yeah.
super well trained. He used them like a hammer to break through the Persian lines
Okay.
at just the perfect time. It's seen as one of the most decisive victories in military history.
Yeah, I can see why that battle made his reputation as a military genius.
Mhm.
But then you read about stuff like the destruction of Thebes. Okay, it was a rebellion. But his response to that, thousands of people were killed.
Yeah.
Survivors were sold into slavery.
Yeah.
That's just chilling.
Yeah, and it wasn't just on the spur of the moment. This was a calculated strategy of terror
Okay.
to make Thebes an example to prevent future uprisings.
Mm-hmm.
It does raise some serious questions, though,
Right.
about his leadership. Even if it worked, was that level of brutality ever justified?
Honestly, I'm struggling with that myself. Does being a military genius excuse that kind of cruelty? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But let's change gears a bit. All this military success raises a big question.
Yeah.
How did Alexander actually rule this massive empire he made? It must have been hard,
Right.
managing all those different cultures and territories.
You're absolutely right. And that's where we start to see maybe some weaknesses.
Okay.
He tried to use a system of local rulers,
Okay.
allowing some regional autonomy. But the big question is,
Was it really autonomy? Or was it just a way to keep control? Were there big problems with that?
definitely pros and cons to it. On the one hand, it meant Alexander didn't have to directly control every single part of the empire,
Yeah.
but it could also cause instability.
Okay.
Local rulers might try to become independent. But there's one big failure that really stands out.
Oh, what's that?
Alexander never set up a clear way to choose his successor. So when he died suddenly at 32, the empire was in chaos.
Wow.
You'd think that someone so good at war
You would think.
would have thought about what happens after he's gone.
Yeah.
It had huge consequences. His generals, they're called the Diadopi,
Okay.
immediately started fighting over who would be in charge. The empire broke up into warring factions. What he built through brilliant military campaigns
Yeah.
fell apart really fast. It really makes you think. Was it all for nothing in the end?
Yeah, that adds another layer of complexity.
Wow.
You're thinking about his legacy. It makes you think about how important transitions of power are even today.
Yeah.
Like in modern politics or even businesses. What happens when there's no clear plan for who takes over?
Exactly. Alexander's story isn't just some old tale.
Right.
It shows us that leadership isn't just about conquering.
Yeah.
It's about building something lasting,
Yeah.
making sure there's a stable future.
Yeah.
It seems Alexander didn't quite manage that. But to really understand his leadership, we need to look beyond the battles
Okay.
and into his personal life.
Yeah.
The sources you gave paint a picture of him as really charismatic, clearly very ambitious,
Right.
but also someone who went to extremes, even violence.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting to me.
Yeah.
You've got this brilliant military mind,
Right.
but also this darker side.
Yeah.
These real flaws.
The most striking example is probably the story of Clytus the Black.
Oh, yeah.
He was one of Alexander's closest friends,
Okay.
a general who had actually saved his life in battle.
Wow.
But during a feast, when they were both drunk.
Yeah, I remember reading about this.
They had a huge argument.
It didn't end well, did it?
No, it didn't.
Yeah.
Alexander, in a fit of rage, killed Clytus with a spear.
Wow.
Shocking, even for back then.
Yeah.
But it's important, though.
Okay.
This wasn't a one-off.
So this violent outburst wasn't just a one-time thing.
Exactly. As he got more powerful, Alexander was more and more prone to these fits of rage.
Yeah.
Lashing out at the people closest to him.
Okay.
It's almost like the constant praise and the belief that he was divine got to his head.
That whole God-king thing is a bit tough for me to grasp.
Yeah.
How did people back then see that? Was it literal or more like a symbol?
It's complicated. Alexander claimed he was descended from gods.
Okay.
Like Heracles and Achilles.
Okay.
He even started demanding to be worshipped like a god.
Wow.
Some actually believed it.
Really?
Others probably saw it as a way for him to hold on to power and justify his actions.
Okay.
Either way, it alienated a lot of his Macedonian followers. They saw him becoming more tyrannical.
Okay.
And drifting away from his roots.
So it wasn't just his personality or temper.
Yeah.
This idea that he was a god also played a role in how people saw him, even his closest allies.
It brings up an interesting question for us today.
What's that?
How much does a leader's personal behavior really matter? Can we separate their actions from their character, or are they totally intertwined?
Tough question. I guess it depends on the leader and the situation.
Right.
But in Alexander's case, I think his flaws, like his temper and his growing ego, definitely had an impact on his ability to rule well.
I agree. It's hard to think that his personal behavior didn't contribute to the instability of his empire, especially in those later years. But to really get Alexander's impact, we need to look past his individual actions.
Okay.
And think about the bigger cultural forces at play. His conquests weren't just about expanding territory.
Okay.
They also had a massive cultural impact that people still debate about today.
You're talking about the clash between the Greek and Persian world.
Exactly. From a Western perspective, Alexander is often seen as this hero, spreading Hellenistic culture, bringing Greek ideas and knowledge to the East. But the Persian perspective, as we see in these sources you provided, is very different.
That's what I found so interesting, seeing these completely opposite narratives.
It's really important to consider these different viewpoints.
Yeah.
Because for a lot of Persians, Alexander wasn't a hero at all. He was a destroyer.
Right.
The burning of Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the Persian Empire, stands as a powerful symbol of that destruction.
Before we talk about Persepolis, can you explain what made it so important to Persian culture?
Persepolis wasn't just a city. It was the heart of the Persian Empire.
Okay.
A place with incredible architecture, full of palaces, temples, and art, representing centuries of Persian history.
Wow.
It was also deeply tied to Zoroastrianism,
the
main religion of the Persian Empire.
So burning it wasn't just some random act.
No.
It was a direct attack on Persian identity.
Right.
Their history, their religion.
Exactly.
No wonder they saw him as the bad guy.
Yeah. This highlights how important it is to think about whose history gets told, whose voices are the loudest, and whose stories are often ignored or silenced.
It reminds us that history is rarely objective.
Right.
Often it's written by the winners, shaped by their biases and viewpoints. When we see Alexander from the Persian side, we get a much more complex, even tragic picture.
Absolutely. And this brings up a question for you. What examples can you think of where history is contested or biased, where certain narratives control how we understand the past?
That's something I'm going to have to think about. But before we move on, there's one more part of Alexander's life I want to touch on. His sexuality.
Yes. That always sparks a lot of discussion.
The sources talk about him having close relationships with both men and women.
Right.
Makes you wonder about his sexual orientation.
Yeah.
But is it even possible to apply our modern ideas to someone who lived so long ago?
It's tricky. We need to be careful about putting our own values and interpretations onto the past.
Okay.
What we can say is that these relationships show how complex social and cultural norms were in Alexander's time.
Yeah.
And they remind us that sexuality, just like any other part of history, is open to interpretation.
Right.
But in the end, it's up to you
to
decide how much weight to give to these accounts and what they might tell us about Alexander the man.
Fair point. Another one of those questions about Alexander that doesn't have a clear answer.
Yeah. And I think that's part of what keeps us interested in him. He's this super complex person.
Right.
Who doesn't fit neatly into any category.
So we've got a brilliant military leader who's also brutal.
Yeah.
A talent for ruling that might have been overshadowed by his flaws.
Right.
And this huge clash of cultures that still shapes how we see history.
Is there anything else we need to cover before we talk about his legacy?
I think we've got a really good foundation. Okay.
Now's the time to look at how it all played out in the long term.
Okay.
What was the real impact of Alexander's life on the world?
Yeah, great question.
Yeah.
Let's get into it.
Okay. Before we jump into Alexander's legacy,
okay,
let's go back to something you mentioned earlier.
Okay.
The burning of Persepolis.
Right.
It's really become like the symbol of Alexander's impact, or at least how people see his impact on the Persian world.
Yeah, it's definitely a turning point in his story. Before that, it was mostly about conquering.
Right.
But with Persepolis, it feels different, more personal, more symbolic.
Exactly. And the sources you gave us, they offer some really interesting ideas about why it was so important.
Okay.
For the Persians, it was devastating. And not just physically, but psychologically, too. Just imagine seeing your whole culture, your religious heritage, literally going up in flames. That would be traumatic.
Right.
It would affect people for generations.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that kind of loss.
And destruction. It makes you think about how different cultures view their heritage.
Absolutely. And it raises some big questions about Alexander's motives.
Right.
Was it intentional, like he wanted to wipe out their culture? Or was it more impulsive, driven by anger or...
Yeah, one of the sources talks about a drunken party that happened right before the fire.
Yeah.
But it also says that maybe Alexander saw it as revenge for when the Persians sacked Athens like 150 years earlier.
That's important because it suggests Alexander knew the symbolic power of what he was doing.
Okay.
He wasn't just taking land.
Right.
He was engaging in a kind of cultural war.
Right.
Using destruction to show his dominance and basically rewrite history.
Wow, that's a scary thought.
It is.
But even though Persepolis shows that destructive side of Alexander, he's also given credit for spreading Greek culture throughout the ancient world.
Yeah.
How do we reconcile those two things?
That's where the idea of Hellenism comes in.
Alexander didn't just conquer places. He also brought Greek ideas, language, art, and architecture.
Okay.
And as he went east, these things started to mix with Persian and Egyptian cultures, creating this fusion we call Hellenistic culture.
So it wasn't just forcing Greek culture on people. It was more like a blend, sharing ideas and traditions.
Exactly. And this Hellenistic period, it lasted for centuries after Alexander died, had a big impact on Western civilization.
Okay.
It influenced everything from art and philosophy to science and math. It's hard to imagine our world today without that Hellenistic influence.
So even though his empire didn't last that long, his cultural impact was much longer lasting. It's pretty cool how something that came from conquest could lead to such a creative period.
Yeah, it shows how history is full of unexpected outcomes.
Right.
Alexander might have thought he was spreading Greek culture.
Yeah.
But it was way more complex than that. It shows how resilient human culture is. It can adapt and evolve and create something new.
Yeah.
Even in a really tough situations.
It makes you wonder what Alexander would think if he could see the world now.
That's a great question.
Would he even recognize his own legacy?
Yeah, that's a question historians still debate. But before we get too hypothetical, let's make sure we've covered everything important about his impact during his life. We talked about the Western and Persian views. But what about the other people he met, like in India?
Yeah, good point. We've been mostly focused on the Greeks and Persians.
Right.
But his campaigns went way further east.
Yeah.
How was he seen in those areas?
It's harder to know, for sure.
Okay.
We have fewer sources from those places. But what we do have suggests it was a mixed bag. Sometimes he was seen as a liberator. Freeing people from oppressive rulers.
So not everyone saw him as a conqueror or destroyer.
Right.
It depended on their own situation and experiences.
Exactly. And we have to remember that these ancient societies were incredibly diverse.
Right.
There's no one Indian perspective or Egyptian perspective.
Right.
People would have reacted to Alexander differently based on their own culture, social status, and beliefs.
Yeah, that's a really important point.
It is.
It's easy to make generalizations about whole cultures.
Yeah.
But history is really about individuals and their stories.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's part of what makes Alexander so fascinating. Even after all this time, he makes us confront our assumptions.
Right.
See how complex the past was.
Yeah.
And appreciate the huge diversity of human experience. This was a man who was both a brilliant strategist and a deeply flawed person.
Yeah.
Someone who can inspire both admiration and disgust.
He's almost like a Rorschach test for how we view history.
Exactly.
Depending on your perspective. You can see him as a hero, a villain, or something in between.
That's exactly why he keeps capturing our imagination. He's this mysterious figure who doesn't fit into any easy category.
Right.
He makes us think critically about leadership, the impact of cultural exchange, and the balance between ambition and morality.
It's been a really thought-provoking journey so far.
It has.
We've looked at his military conquests, his governing strategies, his personal life, and the cultural clashes that shaped his time.
Yeah.
But now I'm really curious about your thoughts on his legacy.
Okay.
What is it about Alexander that still resonates with us today, thousands of years after he died?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
And I think the answer is that Alexander's story is ultimately a human story.
Oh, hey.
It's about ambition, the desire for power, the search for meaning, and the fact that we all eventually die.
Yeah. It really is amazing to think that after all this time, Alexander's story still has this hold on us.
It is.
Even though we know his flaws, there's something about him that's both inspiring and kind of scary.
Yeah, you're right.
When you really dig into Alexander's life, it's all about contrasts.
It really is. He had these incredible triumphs.
Yeah.
But they came at a high cost.
Yeah.
Through ruthlessness.
He sparked this amazing cultural fusion.
Right.
But he also destroyed a lot in the process.
And I think that's what makes his legacy so interesting.
Yeah.
It's not simple, it's complicated.
Right.
It makes us question what greatness really means.
It forces us to look beyond that romanticized image of him as a conqueror.
Right.
And really grapple with the effects of his actions.
We can't ignore the brutality, the destruction, but we also can't ignore the impact of Hellenistic culture.
Right.
Which played a big part in shaping Western civilization.
Yeah. It's a lot to think about for sure.
It is.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, is there one key takeaway you hope our listener will remember? Something that stays with them long after we're done?
I think the most important thing is to remember that Alexander's story isn't just about him.
Okay.
It reflects the human experience.
Yeah.
His ambition, wanting knowledge and power, his flaws, triumphs, his death.
Yeah.
They all echo the struggles we face in our own lives.
That's a really powerful way to look at it.
Yeah.
It makes you think about the choices we make, our impact on the world, the legacy we leave behind.
It's not a simple story.
It's not.
But that's what makes it so captivating.
And I think that's the beauty of history. It's not about finding easy answers or judging people from the past.
Exactly.
It's about using their stories to understand our own lives and the world around us.
I think so. It sounds like you're saying Alexander's true legacy isn't about statues.
Right.
Or the land he conquered.
Yeah.
But about the questions he makes us ask.
Yeah.
Even after all these centuries.
He challenges us to think about leadership,
right,
the impact of cultures interacting, and that balance between wanting things and being a good person.
Yeah.
These are questions that are always important, no matter when we live. So for our listener, I hope this deep dive wasn't just about learning facts about Alexander, but about starting a conversation about power, culture, ambition, and what it means to be human.
And who knows, maybe by thinking about these questions, exploring different perspectives, challenging our own ideas, we can create a future where ambition and compassion go together, where cultures learn from each other instead of fighting, and where leadership is about wisdom and empathy, not conquering.
Now that's a legacy worth working towards.
It is.
And with that, I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Into the world of Alexander the Great.
It's been great.
Remember, this is just the start. There's so much history out there to discover.
There is.
So keep asking questions.
Right.
Keep learning and keep diving deeper into the stories that have shaped our world.